Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Deviant Mind. This is Dominika,
And this is Christopher.
and we are doing a case that actually Chris brought to my attention. I had never heard of it before. We're going back a little bit in time to 2009, and it is the case of Angela Simpson, and her murder victim was a man by the name of Neely,
Terry Neely.
Terry
Yeah, Terry
Neely,
Neely.
who was a paraplegic um, and lived in an assisted living facility.
At the time, he lived in Arizona. Basically, everything here takes place in Arizona. And he was living in an assisted living home with other folks. So I, in my digging, couldn't find that much about his background other than he was 46 in 2009. And yeah, in assisted living, they said he was always very excited to try out his electric wheelchair. So he would have basically an electric ride and he would go through town. And he was pretty well known. Like they would see him and he would wave. He was pretty popular. And then he would just go back to assisted living and live there. But again, I don't know what his profession had been or was, other than he was paraplegic.
So did you read, because in my research, I read that he could actually stand and walk, but only for very short periods of time, and that he might be learning disabled. Did you find that as well?
I found that as well. And in interviews with the murderer, Angela Simpson, she also claimed that he was able to get up, but that was all an act.
I see.
Which is pretty interesting.
That is interesting.
So, I mean, it could be he had a condition where he was able to switch on and off, perhaps through physical therapy. They were trying to make him a little more independent. I think maybe the goal was he keeps going in the neighborhood, makes stops to try and walk. But I did hear that, and I didn't know what to make of it, because I felt I found more about him being wheelchair bound than being able to stand up. And it wasn't until Angela Simpson said that he could that I was like, oh, interesting, which kind of makes sense.
That is interesting.
He could be transporting himself from the standard old school use your hands wheelchair to the electric. He could be doing that quick transition standing up by himself,
Right. And then I did remember saying that people said that he was really friendly, but nobody actually really knew him in the assisted living center. And it almost didn't seem like, not that I don't want to say that they didn't care, but they didn't go out of their way to find out about him either.
Right. Apparently, the night he goes for his motor stroll on August 9th and is basically captured by Angela Simpson, at the nursing home, the vibe was, I wonder where he is. It was like early evening. By the time it was later that evening, they were like, wow, where is he?
Right. Right.
So it definitely took them a while because they thought, he's getting more independent. He's doing this thing. But yeah, there came a point where there was, they started to get very nervous.
Now, did you, in your findings, find that he actually knew Angela Simpson before this fateful night, and that in fact he was a client of hers?
Yes. Well, I couldn't put two and two together with regards to him being a client of hers. Although I did find that out. I didn't quite understand it, but I could see it. And yes, she lived a block away from the assisted living home. So I felt that they did see, from what I found, they did see one another, and they did know one another, actually. She was involved in some shady stuff, including drugs. And it seems, as though she were perhaps living the gang life. Like perhaps she was a gangster from all accounts. She hung out with really seedy people and criminals. So who knows? That's what's really interesting is how, like, if he is making his drives and he makes a stop and he sees Angela, is he asking for drugs? Is she supplying him? uh, she basically lures him to her apartment by promising drugs and sex.
Right. And that I wonder if some of the articles I found is where the because I only found it in a one or two where and maybe she was the one that said this, but of course, as it comes out, she was a complete liar that
Mm-hmm.
he had been known to use drugs with her on multiple occasions and was one of her clients.
Yeah.
Um, but and the fact that she lured him to that apartment that night was because she said she would do it for free. And she
Mm-hmm.
knew that that would get him to come up to the apartment with her. And she
Right.
actually, from certain accounts, I don't know if you found this, was that he actually left the assisted living facility at 8 p.m. specifically to go see her. So he
Mm.
wasn't just having like a nightly ride, that
Right.
they had an assignation.
Right. And then later they do find his wheelchairs outside adjacent to the apartment complex.
Yes.
So the question is, did she help him up? Was there no way for him to gain access and therefore he could stand? That was the other thing, was like, oh, maybe he could. Maybe he could stand if he had a little help.
Right.
Or maybe, uh, you know, you lose the wheelchair. You have him in the apartment. He doesn't need this anymore, and then you get rid of it. So there's
Yeah.
just there's so many possibilities. But yeah, any way you look at it, it seems as though this wasn't random. I do believe that they had. I don't know what kind of relationship they had. It does sound nefarious. And the fact that he was like, "Oh, sex, drugs, great. I'll see you later."
Right. Right.
You're down the block from me. Assisted living won't mind. I'll be right back. But
And
yeah, her whole thing was, which we'll get into, was that he was a snitch,
mhm.
according to her. But yeah, not much known about him other than him being a nice guy. People in the community seeing him and waving, and people saw him. And yes, she lives a block away, so she also knows him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Um, so she let's see. So, it was interesting because when I was looking into this case, they started talking about her and then actually went into what actually happened, which
yeah,
was that I guess there was a burning fire, that's kind of redundant, a fire in a garbage outside of a church.
yeah,
And when the firefighters came and they found the charred remains of a male body inside of that trash can. And I don't know if you, which was what I found interesting. And I don't know if we're going to want to go into the amount of torture that he um, sustained uh, on, under the hands of Angela. But one little interesting tidbit that I found that um, the body had been really burned beyond recognition. And
yeah,
that this is a trigger warning. The body was mutilated quite a bit, and the
yeah,
legs were cut off, and one of his arms had been attempted to be chopped off, and he
yeah.
couldn't be identified through dental records because the teeth had been torn out of his mouth. But during the autopsy, the medical examiner noticed that even though the fingerprints were almost completely burned off, they were still kind of there. And so he pieced together fragments of the prints to finally get one entire print. And that's how they were able to identify the body as Terry Neely,
And as a
which,
backup, when the cops search her home, under the carpet, there's blood. And they
mm,
were also able to match the DNA from the blood, like any blood they can get from his body,
mhm.
they compared, and it was him. So it was just like all the evidence was there.
Yeah. And do you know if he was reported missing by the assisted living facility?
As far as I know, no. Not even from, again, I don't know if he has any family. I don't know if he has any really close friends, but the place where he resided, I don't believe they ever put out a missing persons report or notified the. For instance, this fire in the garbage can and dumpster is really one of the only leads. They don't know that this person's missing. I think it comes from people in the neighborhood. I don't think it comes from the assisted living place, but I may be wrong. As far as I know, it was just like leads coming out of left and right about them. And they're like, oh, who's this guy? And then they just investigate, you know.
I see. And do you know how long she had him for?
3 days. 3 days of torture. And it definitely it's going to be hard to listen to, but I do think to show one's ability in a particular state of mind or mental illness to commit such crazy things to someone. But to let you in on what I found out about her, not much information is known about her either, other than she was known for having a pretty bad childhood. We don't know what that means. Abuse, neglect, we're not too sure. But I believe she disclosed that information in an interview. But just as 4 children, and she's very private and protective of anyone knowing about her children. So in the interview she's given, whenever it comes to, what about your children? You know, they're losing their mother with you, your wife in jail. And she's just like, I can't go there. So we know very little about her background. We know very little about her family life. I found out she was born November 29th, 1975. I believe she might have been 32 or 36 when she tortures and kills Neely. And again, he was 46. At 10 years old, she was diagnosed with a mental illness and was consequently hospitalized.
Do we know what mental illness that was?
No. Okay. In my information, it really wasn't specific, but it was, and in her interview, it seems as though it was heavy enough that they needed definitely to give her around the clock support for her mental well-being. So what's interesting about this case is it walks the fine line between psychopathy, and just being antisocial, sociopath. It could be a mixture of both, but her crime is just very heinous and so convoluted. So off the bat, one of the reasons that she gives in interviews and shares with everyone in jail was that she killed a snitch. That Neely was a snitch, perhaps because he's dealing with her on the drugs. Maybe she could have gang involvement. And I say that just because of her attitude in her videos that I've watched. And she says she's not worried about being in prison because she'll be with family. She has many sisters in there. So that could be another indicator, like, she rolled with gangbangers and, she knows a lot of these people in jail, her sisters. But I do find it very interesting that it's, there's a lot of similarities between her interviews and interviews with Eileen Wuornos, where there's basically no sympathy for those murdered or killed by her, by Angela, and no remorse and feels very justified and pushes everything back on society. It's like, do you think you should have gotten the death penalty? And she's like, yeah, I was hoping I was going to get the death penalty. Isn't that how the system works? Right? I killed someone, you're going to kill me. So very like anti-authority. And in jail, she draws pictures of cops dying and dead cops. Very anti-police. And at one point, she explains in her killing again of this snitch and Neely that it was, he was a white guy. He was after me. I'm black. And so then the question is like, is this does this involve any sort of, is this race? And she says yes. She says it is about race. And then she's also asked about this unusual torture and act of violence from a female. And they're she's asked, most of these serial killers, most killers are male. And she's like, well, equal opportunity. There ought to be more female killers like myself. So she's definitely of this mindset, which she fabricated later. It turns out he's not an informant. He was not a snitch. Prior to this, 3 months prior to her killing Neely, she was in an armed robbery with a fellow named Edward McFarlane, a.k.a. Cracker.
Right.
They did an armed robbery together, and accomplices in the robbery, and apparently they were making threats to anyone who knew what had happened. And I'm a little, yeah.
Is that how they were caught, or how did the police get onto her name in the first place?
So yes, they were well aware of this, and I believe that they were both going to be on trial, and it just never happened. I believe, yes, they knew about her being involved in the armed robbery. And,
no, but I mean, as far as how did they connect her with Terry? Because I know I found something about a press release that told a story about what had happened to him, and everybody in the neighborhood was really scared. But I didn't quite.
Oh.
There was maybe an informant, but
right. So the connection is Angela, which actually goes to show that she did have a relationship, at least, and knew Neely. Confesses to him what happened. So then he knows.
Confesses to who? The informant or to Cracker?
To Terry Neely. She's just you won't believe what just happened, what I did. So then they got fearful, Cracker and Angela Simpson. Why'd you tell Neely? Why'd you tell Terry Neely? So apparently he knew he was making threats on his life.
I see. About the actual their armed robbery. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And then meanwhile, it's their so a witness calls, and it happens to be the building manager. And he says, I think something's going on with my tenant. There's this Angela Simpson, and this guy she was with, Cracker, asked me if they could borrow my car. And the same thing where they said, if you tell anyone, we'll kill you. So there was just this whole trail of threats, and it just kept everyone silent. So perhaps it just got this drug-fueled paranoia. Terry Neely knows too much, right?
I see.
And it was actually on August 18th, they arrest Angela. Okay, so she's 33 years old at the time of killing Terry Neely. Cracker's 36. And the reason why Cracker plays a role in all this is, aside from the armed robbery, he assisted Angela in the burning of Terry's body.
I see. And I saw some reports that he was actually Angela's pimp. Did you find anything about that?
No, but again, that makes sense. I mean, it is this weird underbelly, and if she's offering sex to Terry Neely on the last day of his life, and he's like, "Yeah, right on." I think that makes sense.
Which, by the way, have you seen a picture of Edward McFarland? He has Cracker tattooed on his neck.
On his neck.
Yeah, it's
just in case you forget
that his name is Cracker.
His name is Cracker. It's on his neck. It would have been great if you put Edward McFarlane across his neck.
All right. Oh my goodness.
His actual birth name.
Yeah.
But yeah, so basically it was this paranoia that happens, and then it's on August 2nd, 2009. Terry goes for a roll. Sorry, but it's true. He's rolling around in the neighborhood, and he just doesn't want it. He doesn't get back to assisted living. They got concerned, but then concerns later in the evening, as I said. Actually, they do start looking for him in the neighborhood.
Okay.
So I stand corrected. Like the assisted living people do go out. They start looking around the neighborhood. And it wasn't until 2 days later when witnesses found his wheelchair left outside the apartment building. Right. So the cops search the place. They get access to her apartment, they search the apartment, and that's where they discover they lift up this weird carpet and there's blood. There's like blood all over the floor. And then the call comes in about the trash can of the church.
Yeah, and they also, from another source I found that they found needle nose pliers and a gallon
Yes.
of Great Value brand bleach and a whole, as you said, a whole lot of blood.
So she takes him for 2 days, and the torture involves, first off, he watches it all. She sits him down in front of a mirror, right? So if he's physically impaired, he just has like nowhere else to go, and he's sitting in front of the mirror, horrifying. Basically beats him for these across 2 days, stabs him 50 times. He's still alive. Okay. With the needle nose pliers, she's removing his teeth.
Oh, God.
She would later explain in an interview, when asked why she would do that, she said, well, have you ever had tooth pain? Man, I had bad tooth pain one time and it hurt. So I felt he deserved that. Okay. She hammered a 3-inch nail into his brain.
Oh, my God.
And he's still alive. He's still alive. He's still sitting in front of the mirror. And then ultimately she does him in on the third day or late night, second night, by strangling him with a cable wire. And that was it. And then Cracker comes over and they just, but I got to say, they found her very quickly. And perhaps if this armed robbery didn't happen prior to all this, Terry would have maybe still been alive. Who knows?
Yeah. Now, did she ever give a reason of why she dismembered the body? Was it just for disposal?
It was for the disposal.
I see.
And I think it was something that it just meant nothing to her. And so if interested and anyone listening wants to see what I mean about not being able to determine exactly from her behavior if she's a psychopath or just a sociopath, the interviews are fascinating. She never blinks. Her eyes are very wide. She, again, just no remorse whatsoever. And he deserved it. And he was a snitch. Basically this, the idea that, snitches get stitches. They wind up in ditches, right?
Right.
And that's what leads me to believe, like, this is gang related. This is like this weird, she's probably, being pimped out, getting drugged up, selling drugs. Again, was Terry Neely into drugs? Maybe. I mean, he knew her.
I mean, yeah, but that still doesn't matter. Like, just because you're into drugs, like, to have so much violence done on the body. Now, was this something that she had done before, or was this her first time?
Her first time.
Wow.
Her first killing. And she, in an interview, says that there's an order in prison of who's going to get killed. And first are pedophiles. Mm-hmm. They get killed most frequently in prison. Then snitches. And then cops who get locked up. She just comes off as very matter of fact. Again, absolutely no remorse in any of these videos or interviews. The first interview is when she had just been sentenced to life in prison. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely a great watch. And then they come back and they interview her again, I think, in 2019. So that's 2009, 2019. They revisit her. And she's scary the second time around because she had just been convicted, like, here, you're off to jail. And now that she's had like all these years, so, she's at, boy, you won't believe this. The prison facility she's in is, sorry, just to add to the list of torture, a tire iron. She used a tire iron to beat him and slit his throat. Again, he lived through all of this heinous crime.
I just
Uh,
I don't understand what could have precipitated so much rage on this person. Like
so
I mean,
rich.
it seemed I know that she had mentioned I saw when people were like, "Are you worried about going to prison?" And she was like, "Well, no, it's like coming home, like as you mentioned, because my
Right,
family's there." But then at the same time, um like then why would she be so scared about Terry telling on them in regards to the armed robbery to
right,
precipitate so much violence on a human? Like that's the part I'm not understanding. And of course, like I did I tried to do a deep dive on her as well, and there's just she just kind of didn't exist in the world
right.
until this crime. So there's I like not many. I mean, I scoured through the journalists, and I didn't watch the documentary. There is a documentary on Discovery Investigates, I think it's called.
Mhm.
But even from then, it was just like she had 4 kids with
Right.
like would they think with different men, but maybe not. She wouldn't really say. Nobody
Her
knows where
being
the kids are.
hospitalized, her hospitalization at 10 years old for mental illness, I think, is absolutely key to all this because it sounds as though nothing was done about it.
Yeah,
And she's a young person being, hospitalized. She's away from her family. She's kind of like, who knows how she got what that kind of effect. This could have just been a time bomb, just waiting
yeah.
to go off, but it's
But
interesting
then,
because it's
go
at
ahead.
this random person who she thinks is a snitch. Uh, as I was going to say, she's later interviewed from I believe it's Maricopa County Jail, where Sergeant Pike says that she's the scariest inmate in the place. And she said that in 2010. They definitely believe that she's a gang member. And she said that in the interview, that she enjoyed the killing and that she found it as rewarding work and that she thought uh, Terry uh, would have snitched to people, absolutely. And you know,
Which is, I mean, it's fascinating because she has enough of a mind to try to give a reason for why she did
right?
it, which was the
Yes,
snitching. So somewhere inside of her, she knows it's wrong because otherwise she'd be like, well, I had fun. I wanted to see what it would be like to torture
right.
somebody. Because there is definitely that's what is it called? The sadistic tendency where the killer gets off on the pain of the individual. And
Yeah.
so that's the reason why they tend to torture versus kill immediately.
Mm-hmm.
There's a very specific term for that I am not remembering right now. Um, but I,
It's a thrill kill, I suppose,
well, it's not even
in
a thrill.
some
I mean,
way.
it really is like
Just
I'm
rage.
going to enjoy inflicting pain on you over the same
Yes.
period of time. And it's always interesting because when we talk about, and now granted, she's not a serial killer, she only
Right.
killed one human, which
Right.
again is a horrible, horrible thing in and of itself. But typically, the pathology of somebody like that is
Mm-hmm.
that like there's a reason
Mm-hmm.
typically that they kill, and for a lot of times women, because there's not many women who are known as these types of killers. Obviously we've had the last 2 weeks of killers where the women killed
Yes.
for money,
Yeah.
and they did it with poison. Well, actually,
Yes.
one of them did. The other one did it with a knife, but I'm sorry, with a
Gun.
gun.
Yeah.
But they were like husbands
Yeah.
or people that were close to them. Which I guess
Yes.
in this instance there is supposedly a relationship between the victim and Angela, but at the same time, and this is where the Eileen Warnos comes in,
Mm-hmm.
where like she said she would have killed again if she had gotten the opportunity. I saw from
Yeah.
one of the interviews, and she's like, oh, I wish I could kill some more snitches. But it's
Yeah.
interesting because like why snitch? Like what is it that makes her feel justified in doing that? And maybe that's
That's
where
gang. I think that's the gang mentality.
the gang mentality of that's
Yeah.
like how dare you tell on us. But it's just
Right.
it's so over the top that I actually was reading a couple, and these were not journalists but more like true crime aficionados that were saying that they thought that she was putting on a show so she could get infamous in a way, so she
Yes.
could get a movie
Yes.
deal or she could get a book deal, and become like one of those, female killers that we talk about, like we are
100%.
today, to get some sort of financial stuff out of it, which I think for me is like that could be absolutely the case. But then at the same time, why does it have to be a reason for a woman to kill for money? Whereas
Yeah.
women like to inflict pain all the time too. Like that's not, I
Yes.
don't think that's sex specific.
Yeah.
Women tend to do it in a very different way. But it sounds like her home was not stable. And from somewhere else I read that a lot of her siblings also had mental issues. So was there a violent home? Like she also talked about
Right.
pedophiles. And she tried to
Yeah.
kind of put it off that he was a pedophile, which there's absolutely no um what is it called? Evidence for that at all. So it's
Yeah.
almost like she's trying to create a reason for herself when
Yeah.
really maybe she just wanted to inflict pain.
It's interesting because she both distances herself and then claims full responsibility. Uh, Incidentally, she did plead not guilty to first degree murder, and then she was sentenced to life plus 14 years.
Was it because the first degree is premeditated versus?
Yeah, because they added in the armed robbery, which I found, which is actually the same month, like
I
as all
see.
this going on.
I see. I see.
And when asked in that interview when she's first arrested, they said, "Well, what if he wasn't a snitch?" She replies, "Oops, if he wasn't." I mean, so you're watching these things and you're like, okay, she's definitely hardcore. She just doesn't care. There's no remorse. There's nothing. She's kind of proud. She smiles a lot.
Mhm.
There's a whole thing about like there ought to be more killers. Oh, she refers to him as white trash, which is earlier when I mentioned how race may have played a part in this.
Has she seen her partner Cracker?
As far as I know, they were not an item though.
No. I know that, but like, if she's calling the victim white trash, but yet her partner is
yes.
like
right. I mean, it's like
the trashiest of white trash that ever was. Like,
it's unbelievable.
Which I know that's a very derogatory term, but you guys go look at him, and you know what? We'll post him on the Instagram and see him in all his glory. But it's definitely not a guy you'd want to meet in a. In a dark alleyway by any stretch of the imagination. He looks mean. He looks mean and like, yeah.
So the white trash is a racial motivation. And then when asked, one of her responses is, "I wouldn't kill another black individual." So she owns a lot of responsibilities. She's completely honest, except when asked about her children. In the first interview, when she's about to go to jail and serve out this term, when the interview is done, and you can see this, she goes, "Are we good? Are we done?" Big smile. Just big smile on her face. She's like, "Make me look good." The guards putting her back in the handcuffs, they're like laughing. And it's really interesting because that's the whole time I'm watching this, like, wow, she's really psychotic. Like she's just not blinking at all. She's calm. And then when it ends, it's like, all right, like, how was that? Was it cool?
Yeah. And hence that's maybe where some other true crime people are being like, is this an act? Because of the fact that she wants that in what is it? Infamy? No, that's not the word.
Infamy.
Infamy.
Yeah,
she wants the infamy. And maybe that's why it was so over the top. But then when the cameras are off and when she's not getting the attention, she's like, cool. Okay. Did we do good? Right. So it's almost like she is in her own little movie being like, this is going to be how a hardcore killer acts.
Yeah.
But then to be able to brutalize a human body like that, I mean, Jesus, how do you even know? Like, did she see that somewhere? Had she witnessed something like that before? Like, I can't stretch my imagination to, and I'm a crime writer. Like, I can't, like, I tend to do very heavy research because I I mean, I'm a normal human being. I just don't have
Right.
that kind of like, yeah, I
Best we
just
could do
find
is
it.
just like explore their minds and and try and figure out how they would get to that
But
point.
why the teeth? I mean, just like that's so
I mean,
specific.
torture is torture. I mean, it sounds like it might have been all premeditated. Incidentally, she's become a Muslim. She joined the Muslim faith. Her second interview is completely not that. Like, she never drops her guard, never is like, hey, that was fun. Are we done? She's definitely more hardened in the later
Really?
interviews.
Now, did she actually
And
get married in prison too? Did I read that correctly?
I believe that she wants to get married. I don't know if she's been asked yet. I don't know if she's engaged, but she definitely wants to be married, I guess. And I just want to throw this out there. There recently, I don't know how long ago, was a TikTok challenge where kids and people were basically lip syncing Angela Simpson clips from her interviews, which is pretty
come
gross.
on.
Pretty gross.
Come on,
Pretty gross.
people. Like, that's
TikToking, lip syncing this.
Oh, that's
Killers,
awful.
words. It's awful.
That is awful. That's
I gotta go get a feed.
okay. So everybody, thank you guys so much. That was the case of Angela Simpson. And see you back next week. Bye.
Bye. I'm so sorry, but we're
I know
good.
you're like, wait a minute. Yeah, we're good. This episode was sponsored by The Creek Killer, Book 1 in the Harriet Harper thriller series written by me, Dominika Best. What would you do if you read The Police Found Your Body in a Creek? Find out in The Creek Killer, available on Amazon. Thank you for joining me and listening to this episode. If you like my show, please give me a rating and review. It helps other listeners find this podcast. Follow Dominika Best Presents The Deviant Mind wherever you listen to your podcasts. Visit thebeststorytellingnetwork.com, where you'll find show notes, my books, links to social media, and much more. Join my Patreon for special subscriber perks, like 2 extra exclusive episodes a month and a Q&A with me at patreon.com/The Deviant Mind Podcast. Until next time.